project. And I've got lovely music playing over my speaking, which is still going. There we are. Thank you very much. Yes, so it's my great pleasure to introduce your chair for this workshop, Dr. Chris Fremantle. Chris.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Liz. So we've canned the PowerPoints. We're going to do a quick introduction each and try and create an opportunity for dialogue and debate. The slight difficulty here with that is that I've got light in my eyes and my glasses are not completely clean. So if people want to jump into the conversation, you're gonna stick your hand up and speak and not worry too much about it, okay? Because we want to try. If we weren't broadcasting this session, we would move ourselves down and feel more in the body of the Kirk. So just imagine that we're down in the body rather than. So, having done that, I'm Chris Fremantle. Sennan Mattar is from Glasgow Caledonian Centre for Climate Justice. I'm going to hand the microphone over in a minute to Sennan first, and he's going to talk a little bit about his focus. He's going to talk for maybe 5 minutes, try and give you a vivid example of the sort of things that matter. The next person in the line is Eve Mosher, who's an artist, not an academic, but who works with research a lot. And then the third person is Larissa, who is a professor at Glasgow University and an earth scientist and geographer and advisor to the World Bank, I discovered. So there you go. Is that right? Yeah, okay. So briefly, just to say, it seems to me that there have been a lot of references to research made all day in various ways. And so in a sense, this is an opportunity to actually have a conversation around what it means to be doing that research in this context, around the role of the arts and design, because actually we had a very good example of where things like service design, actually we had two great examples from New Practice and from Dundee of where designers actually are also in this space doing important work, together with climate change and in particular a focus on water, which is an inherently extra-disciplinary problem. So let me hand over to Sennan, and he can get us started with something about justice.
Certainly. Hi, everyone. Great to be here. So I'm Sennan Mattar. I'm a lecturer on the Masters in Climate Justice at Glasgow Caledonian University. What I do in the centre is always working on interdisciplinary research projects. And the reason for that, is most of the time, whatever project we're working on, we are usually dealing with the physical impacts of climate change manifesting at a social or human level. It doesn't really matter in terms of where we see climate change happening. We tend to view or understand climate change as this physical phenomenon, but the way we measure the impact is based on social conditions, people's vulnerability, how they respond to climate change, how they rebuild after facing a climate change impact. All of those are dependent on social conditions. So simply viewing climate change as a natural event or a physical event blinds us to the fact that there is a host of social, cultural, economic factors that completely influence how we deal with the impacts of climate change. So if I was going to mention one project we were working on a year after the height of COVID-19 was our climate change and COVID-19 CC19 project. It was looking at Malawi and Rwanda. It was looking at the intersection of climate change, COVID-19, and international development. And part of this project was through participatory approaches, engaging with communities, so allowing them to be part of the research project. So we used things like photo voice, trying to be a bit more creative in our research design. This is community members through video journaling, through photography, documenting how they deal with climate change, what sort of the impacts are. And we went to the communities we are working with and essentially asked them who within your community is vulnerable. And this sort of approach meant we got a much more diverse view or much more nuanced view of who actually within the community is exposed to climate change, which we might not have otherwise got if we were simply looking at meteorological data or the various pigeonholed ways that we tend to look at vulnerability to climate change. And through this process, we also found community members then came up with solutions. How can they deal with the impacts of climate change? What do they need to mitigate and adapt to it? And these solutions, again, tend to not just focus on the technological and engineering solutions, but social support programs, cultural arts, anything which bolsters social cohesion, which if we were, and we've been talking about funders today, that when it comes to addressing climate change, we can't simply pigeonhole solutions based on whatever particular discipline we're focused on. Climate change affects every aspect of life and society. So we require those multidisciplinary approaches. So this is all to say the technological and engineering parts of addressing climate change are only half to the equation. If we're going to address the reality of how climate change actually affects people, which it manifests at that human level, we have to involve natural sciences with the humanities and with the social science if we are to address the reality of how climate change actually manifests. So that will be me.
Thank you very much. Can I hand over to Yves Mosher? Do you want to tell us a bit about what you've done, where you've intersected with research and so on?
Sure.
That'd be great.
Yep, thanks, Chris. I'm going to be up here just nodding a lot because I agree with a lot of what these guys, I don't know if we're going to have much conflict up here, because I sort of have been working in a similar way, but from a creative arts background, creative arts focus. I've been working at the intersection of climate crisis and communities and creativity for, I can't do the math, since 2006, so about 18 years. And just really working within communities, embedded within communities to kind of discover what it is that they're feeling, how to translate that up so that those making policy decisions, those making decisions at a higher level can really respond to the needs of the community using creative tools to do that, whatever media is appropriate. And that has ranged from a baseball field marker, a football pitch marker with chalk, to film and video, to most recently a 6-meter map talking about people's existing connections to the River Fendorn watershed. So I guess a pretty good example of the way I work, I started a 3-year project. We really kicked it off in March of 2019, which was really unfortunate timing, if you guys remember what happened then. And that was really looking at the urban heat issues for the city of Philadelphia, working in 3 communities with community leads, community organizations, local researchers. So thinking about the research, I work across communities, researchers and scientists, people working on solutions, policymakers. It really is across all the different kind of strands that are required. Worked with 3 local lead artists and then worked on projects for over those 3 years where it started with deep research in the communities. What are you guys already feeling? What are you seeing that are tools that you're already using, and what would you like to see change? So also kind of imagining what's possible in the future. And now my focus really with my work is trying to put into place spaces to allow more of that imagining what's possible in order to put that forth and then start to work on how do we get there? How do we go from, I live in a small fishing village, how do we go from being vulnerable to sea level rise to kind of taking ownership of our resources that we have in hand and reimagine ourselves for the next century as a fishing village? How do we stay relevant and alive, basically? Yeah, that's me. But now I'm tangled.
Right. Larissa Naylor, you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, sure. So I'm Larissa Naylor, as I'm a professor of geomorphology and environmental geography, but I'm not a straight-laced academic. I've worked in environmental consultancy and in environment agency and equivalent in Canada and the UK. So I've worked in and out of practice. So I do a lot of work at the science policy practice interface. I work a lot with artists and designers as well, product designers. I work with economists, urban planners, a whole range of disciplines. And for some examples of what I've done is I've led on the adaptation component. So I work a lot more on adaptation than mitigation. And the best way to think of adaptation is we need to learn to live with the climate changes we've already committed ourselves to. And we're unfortunately on the red path, not the blue path. So and the continual erosion of net zero targets and not meeting them means we're going to continue to be on the red path, which means we're looking at the high end of the social economic scenarios, which means we're looking at probably 2 to 3 meters of sea level rise by 2300. Now, only in 2019 was sea level rise curves to 2300 produced. And we're still really only planning to 2100. And a lot of people think that sea level will stop rising then. It won't. The hockey stick curve will continue to accelerate. And so that requires us to not just, so we have to, I deal a lot with how you bring uncertainty with that. And the signal is clear, it's going up. Every IPCC since 2001, the rate of sea level is going up. What's uncertain is how humans respond in terms of net zero, but the reality is we're going to be living with ever more problems. So between Inverbervie and Aberdeen, sea levels historically were 9-10 meters higher, and there's a ridge you can walk on. IPCC has said they cannot rule out 15 meters of sea level rise by 2300. So we have to transform how we think. The landscape is dynamic. It is going to dynamically adjust and respond, which means current places that are land will become salty. Current places that are river will become riverbed, and other places that are dry will become rivers. And we need to plan our human systems with allowing nature to be dynamic and to dynamically adjust. And we need to then transform how we think about everything. And that requires us to be intergenerationally just. And to do that, we need to safeguard space now for moving things like the mainline railway to Fort William. Are we planning for that? Have we put in easements into planning? Are we doing the right multi-level governance? And so we need artists, designers, and makers to help visualize alternative futures, to make it seem a positive rather than frightening, because communities will need to move. And how do we do that in a just and equitable way? Requires this transdisciplinary approach. And so a lot of what we do is support local authorities, for example. We haven't had a chance to look at Scottish Government's edits to Edinburgh's city plan, but we now hopefully have a coastal buffer. There's a constraints plan on an area of development that says they must do a flood and erosion risk assessment, a detailed one, because at the moment SEPA's maps are bathtubs and they're changing them to have wave overtopping. So we're underestimating our risk. So how do we use the arts to convey that risk so that we can implore politicians and businesses and others, communities, to take bold decisions now for future generations? And that we should be thinking about the future generation first and the current generations as limiting our life, limiting what we do to make sure that we have planetary boundaries for future generations.
Brilliant, thank you. Yes, I was the producer for Helena Newton Harrison's work, Greenhouse Britain, which we did between 2006 and 2009, and we started with 3 maps. The first map showed 5 meters of sea level rise, the second map showed 10 meters, and the third map showed 15 meters. Nobody's ever put a timescale on 15 meters for me before, and that was the one thing that they very carefully didn't do, was put a timescale on 15 meters at that point. So that's fascinating. I'm going to ask one question, just because I think it's really useful so all day it's felt to me like there's a conversation which is using the word adaptation and the word transformation kind of as if they're interchangeable. And I'm just curious what the panel, so two of the panel have arrived at lunchtime or more recently, so they haven't heard all of this conversation, so they're trusting me, but you all would confirm that those two words, those of you who've been here all day would confirm those two words have been thrown around quite a lot, and they've kind of not been distinguished, for me anyway, and I think it'd be quite useful to just get into that for a moment. So I don't know, Sennan, transformation, adaptation.
Sure. So I'm thinking of a project. We did a piece of research in Glasgow where we were looking at the instances. One of our PhD researchers was looking at the fact that Glasgow is going to be experiencing more extreme heat. It's going to be more extreme flooding. And it was looking at the distribution of green and blue infrastructure to try cope as a sort of adaptation approach in order to be able for the city to cope with more heat and more flooding. But what then they also started looking at was areas of Glasgow which are more deprived and their access to these sort of adaptation measures. And what they essentially found is if you're from a more deprived part of Glasgow, you can have less access to that adaptation measure. So the adaptation measure by itself is only as effective as it can actually protect those who need it to protect. So when we talk about transformative approaches, the adaptation measure by itself is ineffective. We're required to address almost the root cause of where that vulnerability is coming from, which is marginalization, deprivation. Without changing that, you can throw as many adaptation measures as you like at it. And that's something Glasgow City Council knows, as most acknowledge that when we've talked with them. For many councils who are trying to implement similar measures, it's for them, these green infrastructure projects, they're a necessary adaptation issue, but they're not entirely sure how do I address the wider issues of deprivation and social inequality. That requires a lot bigger conversation than they themselves always have power over. So that's how I would distinguish here.
Yeah, I would just say yes, and I think when we think about adaptation, it is often, even if it's big adaptation, so, thinking about my fishing village, we could put gabions down at the coast, or we can move the fishing village brick by brick up the hill. That's big adaptation. That's not transformation. Transformation for me comes from massive rethinking of the systems that have got us in this place to begin with. Colonialism, extractivism, capitalism. And we have to get to the point where we're checking these inequalities. And we heard it from Leah this morning and from Ben as well. We're checking the inequalities that exist, and we're building in the systems that can actually redistribute and change this extractive nature. We're still living in a country that is treated as, I keep forgetting what the name is. In the States, there's a zone around anything that's chemical plants and things does anybody remember what that term is? I feel like Scotland is that entire zone. We keep getting massive wind farms put up in the sea, on the hills. Great, we're doing renewable energy, but we're just replicating the existing energy systems where it's held by a single entity. It's not held by the people who live there. We aren't doing district heating. We aren't doing community-based solar. None of that. We have to rethink the massive systems and quit replicating the old systems with new, shiny, different things. That's get off the soapbox. She's going to take it one step further, probably.
Or maybe slightly differently. I suppose in academic theory around adaptation, incremental adaptation are small-scale adjustments, possibly in terms of brick by brick. Transformative adaptation is in some ways rethinking systems, but it's also accepting that we cannot maintain things in their current place. It's often very geographical. And I suppose that's one of the things that came out of, so the fifth IPCC, the big strapline was climate resilient development pathways. So, and I think how do we transform our systems to have climate resilient development pathways? And development means wholesale development rather than economic development, in my mind at least. But the latest IPCC talks about headlines quite a lot in their final synthesis about adaptation limits. And so I think in my field at least, one of the issues is we're making good even if it's seen as something novel, something transformative, so a nature-based approach to, say, flood risk management, it's often still a sticking plaster, because the landscape itself is going to be underwater by 2150 or something like that. And we're not thinking about that wholesale landscape change. And so we really need to think, what does this landscape want to do? We have to look into the deep past, and we have to use uncertain information. We have to use sedimentological data, not instrumental data. They did this with Hurricane Sandy. They used newspaper records, they used sedimentological data, which a lot of the scientific organizations don't like to use, governments don't like to use, because it's uncertain. And they found that Hurricane Sandy was underestimated by an order of magnitude, because you could put the 1821 event in the same place as Sandy, and it's not unprecedented. So they're underestimating flood risk in New York by an order of magnitude. And so whilst we don't need a lot more science to make decisions, we still need to make sure we're making the right decisions and we're doing risk the right way. And I think if we understand that risk better, we'll implore people to take that transformative leap. And a more positive thing is that within Glasgow, there's a strategic program that's run out of the University of Glasgow with Glasgow City Council called the Gallant Program, but they're using a systems approach, but the City Council's working with part of the team that I'm involved in, looking at donut economics and applying donut economics as a principle rather than conventional economics. So we're starting to see some really important shifts in local authorities and governance to try to redress some of those traditional ways that you've described.
All right. I think it's time to throw it open to the floor and open up the conversation a bit. So I see a hand up already so I'm going to insist that you wait for the microphone to come to you, so that if there is anybody left online, they can hear what's going on. And I hope that somebody's monitoring the online thing. So if there are questions coming in excellent. So if you are online, you can send us a question and we will get it. Lorna.
So we know we need transformative change, and we've talked about some of the challenges there, and you've mentioned donut economics, Larissa, but how do we get past 1-year financial budgets and 5-year political cycles?
Yes. How do we get past 1-year financial cycles and 5-year political cycles? I'm happy.
Funding cycles of 6 months yeah.
I once did a suite of interviews with senior people in local authorities in Suffolk and Norfolk, and they're on the front line of 2 to 10 meters of erosion a year in some places. So they're really at the front line of some of the already having climate migrants from erosion. And he said, we have to find a way of winning hearts and minds that adaptation is in everyone's interest to do now. And that's the challenge, is how do you make it politically salient and relevant now? And unfortunately, it probably requires some economics, in the sense of the thing about adaptation compared to mitigation is there's no green jobs. It's about avoiding loss and damage and future loss and damage and minimizing loss and damage and disruption and mental health problems and everything that comes from it. So how do we show that you're basically being precautionary? And so can it become sexy to future-proof, ostensibly? Like how do you create an environment where that long-term benefit and the savings of that are somehow brought into the day-to-day? So we talked actually at a thing I was at this morning about food security and Storm Babette, and all the potatoes rotted. And that's because the rains are coming earlier, thicker and faster. So already our food security is impacted. So can you take examples like that are very real? Price of potatoes is something majority of Scottish people buy, and make that relevant as to why there's an urgency. And then that might help catalyze change. But it's finding something, I think, in the here and now. But also, like with sea level rise, we were saying, we visualize the baby being born in 2015 in their life to show what that 1 meter looks like across someone's life. So it's about personalizing some of the risk, or the economics might then help make the decision.
I don't know if this completely answers it, because I certainly work in shortened funding cycles, but one thing that artists and designers are good at doing is sort of creating, build it and they will come kind of thing. So doing pop-up parks. Once you've experienced that pop-up park, that took a very short time to do it. It took a very little budget, but then once it's been experienced and people demand that it stays, then you can do sort of the longer term planning. We saw a lot of that with COVID, with sort of the pop-up sidewalk cafes. And again, projects I'm working on, we're just visualizing ideas by doing large projections, and those don't cost, but they do cost, but they don't cost as much as actually regreening the city center. But it's sort of, getting those ideas out there on the short time frame under a small budget in order to create that demand that next thing can happen. So creative tools are really useful for that.
Sure. I suppose one thing I would add on that then is something that the Scottish Government's currently doing. They've got a consultation which finished a few weeks ago, I believe, for their National Adaptation Plan. They're trying to... Was it yesterday? Well, if anyone... Excellent. Yesterday then. Their approach is meant to mean all that adaptation monitoring is meant to be community driven. So by making sure there's continuous monitoring, making sure communities are the one who are expressing what is needed for adaptation or dealing with the impacts of climate change, I think that helps try make a sort of long-term policy for policymakers, because they know it's coming from the communities who vote for them. Whereas if we're still restricted by project funding, which is only as important as we get it, that's not very inclusive for long-term planning anyway. So that sort of approach would definitely help for sure.
I thought you were going to mention the previous consultation that we did. So the good thing is Scotland is bringing in their version of the Welsh Future Generations and Wellbeing Act. And we submitted a university response to that. So I would implore everyone to pass on to everyone to make sure that when the next round comes in, because that was early evidence stage rather than subsequent stages, is to really push for that to be an umbrella piece of legislation so that every other decision has to think about future generations, which is what's happened in Wales. Now, it can be stronger than the one in Wales, but if that comes through with the teeth that it could have, that could be really transformative. And that would then help make sure that we're trying to make intergenerationally just decisions consistently for every decision we take. And that, because so much of it is about making the right decisions now for the future, because there's such a lag of response of, say, sea level rise or temperature or what have you, is that it's not as immediate. And I guess that's the thing, is can we be proactive? Can we get systems in place so we're proactive when we get the storm? We don't just command and control and rebuild. We then use the storm as a catalyst for transformative change.
It's a really interesting question, and I just want to reflect from an arts perspective, a little bit from an arts perspective. So the arts are the gigging economy, right? In the arts, we live from project to project, right? We really, really, really seriously live from project to project, and it's one of the real challenges, because it does mean that certainly as a producer, I see people doing really, really interesting work, and then they're doing something else 3 years later because the money's moved on. But it's also true that actually the arts are also able to maintain, some artists and organizations are able to maintain very long-term trajectories of continuing to pursue something in spite of existing in the most churny thing that exists. I mean, the arts are the epitome of churniness, actually. If you go and look at what's going on in the art fairs and in the London, there's a world in the arts which is so churny. It's not true. It's horrendous. But actually, and some of that is about actually just tactically understanding how to maintain a practice. Actually, it's about what a practice is, not a discipline, not a funding scheme. It's in spite of everything else that you have a practice. It's like if you go and look at Ellsworth Kelly's plant drawings, he went into his studio every day and did a drawing of a plant. And so it didn't matter what commission he had, what else was going on, he went actually the thing that I'm going to keep working on regardless is this core bit of practice. And I think that's great. And then I'm faced with the situation where we have a program. There's a big exhibition of environmental art, a big exhibition we've been asked to put together. My colleague Anne Douglas and I have been asked to put together an events program for a 4-venue exhibition of Helena Newton Harrison's work that's in San Diego in the autumn. We start 4 days after the US elections, right? And actually the conversation we had with one of the gallery directors was, yeah, if Trump's elected, we'll have an emergency meeting because whatever we've planned at this point won't apply. It just won't. So what I'm saying about practice is important, but being prepared to recognize that actually there are things in the pipeline that could result in actually having to do emergency adaptations is also necessary. And so I don't know, I think there are things that the arts are good at, and one of them is maintaining a practice. And that's actually not unimportant when you're trying to answer those questions about having to deal with cycles. Another question, yes. Oh, I've got 2 now. Excellent. But the person at the front there, yep, you, yep. And then afterwards, one, yes, I see that.
Hi.
Actually, can people introduce themselves? Because we've all introduced ourselves. It'd be nice to know who's asking the question.
Yeah, of course. My name is Marlies Vermeulen. I'm from Deer Hunter, one of the partners. I'm a cartopologist, so I make maps based on anthropological fieldwork. And I'm currently, as there's plenty of doctors here, I'm doing a PhD as well, finishing it off at the Maastricht University for what that's worth. But anyway, I had a question because this was introduced as a workshop on interdisciplinary research. And interdisciplinary, but you can't be interdisciplinary if you don't collaborate in a way. So collaboration is in front of every interdisciplinary practice in a way, and it is a practice, as you said. So I think it's that there's labor involved with being able to collaborate with one another. And there's plenty of people that wrote a lot about collaboration, and there's one particular part that I found very important in collaborating, and that is having a formal and informal part of collaboration. Being part of this beautiful project and being here in Glasgow for the whole week, we have a lot of, like today, formal aspects, but this morning we had breakfast together, and this evening we probably go for dinner somewhere at a beautiful place here in Glasgow, and we'll have again an informal talk. So I'd like to invite you to give me an example of such an informal moment where collaboration was really shaped and really show us the vulnerability of interdisciplinary practices rather than research, and just keep it small rather than big, and close rather than remote.
Mine's a little remote. I do have an example. It was I worked on a project called High Water Line that happened in a lot of different locations around the world, and always worked with local researchers on the sort of scientific data and designing the maps that we used for the project. And in Miami, I worked with a local researcher there, and we talked through the project, and he came in and presented to the community members, and then he actually went out and did the project with us. And I always invited researchers I was working with to come do the sort of community performance participation aspect. And his kind of experience of walking, he was doing his floodlines, so doing the future floodlines, his experience of actually walking that data and talking to people who lived and worked and really embodying, a lot of the work I'm thinking about is like, how do you embody climate scenarios? And he said that it actually changed how he approached the data, that it became more about understanding not just lines on maps, but places and people, and trying to think about how the data that he creates impacts people when he puts it out. So it's just sort of, I don't know that it concretely changes how he writes a report, but he's certainly thinking about it when he's putting together his data. I don't know if that kind of responds, but that's an example.
So I've done work with at the interface of, I guess, ecology, geomorphology, and design, product design. And so we spent time in the field together. So we had the product designer go out and look at barnacles in the field, and then he had arts students dance like barnacles when they're feeding at high tide. And we were trying to design for baby barnacles. And so the science had just done a quick wire brush and had found that if you have 1 millimeter grooves, it's about the size of the cyprid barnacles. So he designed the tile to look like barnacles. So it's very organic, and so it's led to us doing a whole bunch of work around designing for humans and non-humans, but also bringing back this notion of nature, but not just nature from a biodiversity point of view, because I'm a biogeomorphologist, and the habitat matters, and it's so often forgotten in the biodiversity debate, and it's really fundamental. So it's actually designing urban structures now that look like a natural rocky shore, so people have that connectivity to nature, and not just the biology, but to nature. And that all stemmed from trying to informally kind of going and spending time in each other's kind of respective environments, and then learning how that worked to then help design better. So it was about disruptive, convergent and divergent thinking and disruption to working practice, I would say. And having to let go and trust the other people, would say, are the key things that came out of that.
Well, I was going to say, from my experience in research academia, is typically you work with people you get on with. So the informal aspect of collaboration is obviously very important. At our centre, we are meant to be a bridge between an engineering school, a business school, and a health school. So we ran things like climate cafes, is what we called them, just a space where we got food, drinks, invited people in just to talk, have a good time, really. I did ask the university if we could make them climate pubs, but they felt I was trying to put a fast one on them. Yeah, but it was a very important aspect of actually just giving people a space to socialize, to talk about their work. Now, my background is environmental science, and after just talking with Dr. Michael Werkovich, he joined the centre, and we were part of these climate cafes, and we were talking. A part of any sort of collaboration is trying to find a common language. Him as a political geographer, I think he was talking to me about the cosmologies of knowledge, is what he said. And the only thing I could think of is I think I'm an Aries. I don't know what you're talking about. So we had to find a sort of common language to connect, as in what our different disciplines are. And it's hard to really do that in a formal setting. There needs to be a lot of back and forth. So making those spaces, making those ways that people can just get to know each other and develop that sort of repertoire is very important for any sort of interdisciplinary collaboration.
Yeah, I think the social side of it, I had a really, really wicked thought about interdisciplinarity and these big multidisciplinary research projects, which is we all live in very hierarchical institutions where an awful lot of stuff cascades down. So we all go and get involved in multidisciplinary research projects because they're very flat and we all respect each other and we take time to listen to each other. So I think they all exist because we hate our internal siloed institutions. So we go and do this other stuff in order to get out of the institutions, which is a slightly cynical version of why why we have massive amounts of research funding directed towards big projects like that. There was another question there.
Thank you. Oh, hello, it's Jackie Sands. I was talking from the NHS, Arts and Health, but I'm now just going to talk as a resident of Renfrewshire. It's to the west of Glasgow. I live on a hill and I've looked at the floodplains. I know that the airport will go underwater. I'm very interested in what you said about redesign of infrastructure, moving of communities. I always thought I'd be fine. I live on the top floor, so even if the floor below me, the water rises, I'll just get a boat. But now I realise that the train station might not exist. I also was a member of the local community council until I just couldn't bear it any longer. And the people on the community council were concerned about the bins, of course, and they were concerned about a new sign, whether it addressed planning permission regulations or not, for a new guest house. They were annoyed with unruly young people drinking in an underdeveloped green space rather than helping them to exist and understand where they live. So my question is, how do we get local community councils, people like that, to relinquish their ongoing power and think about future generations?
I don't necessarily have an immediate answer, but when I was doing those interviews in Suffolk and Norfolk, exactly the same issue came to play there. And not only that, it was also the business support officers in the council. So they could go in to help with flood damage, but they weren't helping them think about siting their businesses out of harm's way. And the business development plan was all about growth and nothing about risk. And it was all about the chocolate box part of summer and the coast rather than winter and the coast. And so I think at a number of levels, it's about how do we shift those conversations. And these community empowerment bills are fantastic, but somehow there has to be a requirement, I think, to come out of the minutiae of the parochialism of some of those decision makers. And that happens up and down this country, if not in other countries as well. So it's about do we need a mechanism? So if that Future Generation Wellbeing Act comes in, then they would be beholden to that, hopefully. But it's about empowering them to see beyond their immediacy. And that is a challenge. I don't have an answer to it, but I'm saying that's not unique, unfortunately. And so I think it is a pressing concern, is how do we make them think beyond that? And especially with coming up to elections, how do we make the electorate think beyond the immediacy in terms of who is going to make the best long-term social, fiscal, environmental decisions for the country, as well as the short-term?
I have a funny perspective because I am a current community councillor for a very small village, so there's not many of us, and I don't have a lot of power. And same thing. I mean, right now we're just obsessed with the gala and how are we going to get the inflatables and all the things. And I'm sitting here waiting, thinking, when can I get Larissa to come talk to the community? How do I broach that, especially as an in-about comer, that I'm not from the village? But I also think that there needs to be even further devolution, that communities should be making decisions on behalf of themselves. But perhaps the idea is that as the money comes sometime in the future, there's also these kind of trainings, requirements that are put onto communities that, yes, you do need to worry about the bins and the potholes because those do impact everyday life, but you also have to be thinking about future generations and what is it that you're doing. So we saw from Creative Scotland how they're sort of asking and requiring more organizations to report on their audience climate impacts. How does that start to get woven into? We're seeing more trainings, cultural adaptations programs, that can happen to community councils too. How do we start to, infiltrate and shift how people think? I wish it was going to happen overnight. I don't think it will, but you've got somebody advocating on a community council to try and make something happen. I don't know if anything's going to happen. I'll let you guys know when I'm brave enough to make it happen.
I was just thinking about that Welsh village, I think it's Fairburn in Wales, which is essentially going to be reclaimed by the sea. Now, those community members are engaging with their council because they've essentially been told, we won't be able to save the village, you're not going to be compensated, and eventually you'll just have to move. Sorry. they're very much engaged with trying to get more involved in what the council's doing because they face such a threat. But you're right, it shouldn't take that sort of incentive to get communities involved. But I mean, what you're saying about the priorities, research we've done on community priorities, when even this might seem a bit counterintuitive from climate researchers, is that climate change is very rarely at the top of the list of the priorities they face. Climate change is very abstract. I'm not sure many of you would be able to tell me what a 0.1 degrees average warming in temperature feels like, but you might be able to tell me about cold, hot days, extreme weather events, things like this. So whenever we're trying to make climate change a part of the agenda, it's all about meeting people where they are. Mm-hmm. It's about understanding what their priorities are and trying to build capacity in communities, education, awareness of how climate change affects their priorities. I mentioned my colleague, Dr. Mikulevic, when he did his research, he looked in São Tomé, and it was an interesting research project of a UN adaptation project which went to the community. Said, here are the solutions, here's everything you need to do, and the community said, no thanks. And incredibly ineffective type of project because it is, again, not coming from the priorities of the community. So again, it's, I say, meeting where people are, trying to raise that capacity in the communities before, again, we get to an interesting like Fairburn when it's almost too late. But, yeah.
Can I swing it back to the arts too? So one of the ways that I'm trying to sort of sideways get this into my own community is doing creative gatherings in the public hall. So come and create. And my sort of long-term thinking is it's going to become a creative climate cafe. So after we've met a few times and we're getting to know, I mean, I know a lot of people in the village, but we're sitting there, we're making, how do we start thinking about the making that we're doing in terms of like creating a more resilient community? So how do this knowledge of what we're doing translate into using local resources, thinking more long-term? So it's that inserting the arts as like a sideways way to get into the complex stuff again.
So, there's an institute. Yeah, just give me a second. There's an institution, somebody that a colleague works in, where they have two sort of organizational priorities for the staff. One is an organizational priority around teaching, and the other one's about research. The senior management changed, and the new management came in and said, "Shit, we're not really doing this research thing very well. Let's do a culture survey of what the people involved in research think." And then they fed back on it, and somebody who had been a head of school said, "It's not really surprising. I got endless emails about student surveys. I literally never got a single email as a head of school chasing me about research." So there is something about the problem in a way is, what are you accountable for? And I did wonder if maybe in the consultation to do with the Future Generations Act is actually making something like parish councils, making some sort of accountability and reportability about something, as boring and tedious as it sounds, and like I'm talking about generating more paperwork, but actually that really struck me when my colleague told me about this, and I went, yeah, actually I can totally see, if nobody ever asks about something, then you're not going to talk about it. If you're asked about stuff, then you'll talk about it. So there's something about reorganizing what we're accountable for that's pretty important. I think there was a gentleman at the back. Well, I could see, yeah. So, did you have your hand up? I did have my hand up. Hang on, you've got to wait for the microphone. And you've got to introduce yourself.
Try and be quick so my friend there at the front can get a question in as well. I'm Mark Langdon. I work for UWS, a lecturer in community education. So just your point on adaptation, transformation, you can't adapt to the end of the world. So that would be my take on that one. what I think is coming through here is interesting that we're talking about community councils. The Carnegie UK are looking at well-being, and they've got a measure of democratic well-being. And for me, I'm always interested in these absences. There's a brilliant, term called agnotology, the production of ignorance, and part of that is strategic ignorance. So the ability to ignore. And I've got to say that from my experience of Glasgow City Council, it's still in the trickle-down phase of build more hotels, give money to property developers, and ignore the ever-growing inequalities and poverty in the city. And that is very, very problematic, whether you're an artist or a care worker or whoever. So I'm really interested, because I think the universities that we all work at are very much engines of inequality and engines of extractive epistemic violence in terms of communities. So I think we need to be much more, end on a positive note, the decolonial and feminist economies work that the Oxfam and places like that are doing. There are these deep commons type work. There's all sorts of alternatives to the paradigms we're in at the moment. We're just not talking about them enough. Thank you.
Do any of you want to come back on the extractivism of higher education, or do we all just agree that it's a fact? Sorry, so I heard Sennan and the way he described the work that he was doing as being quite alert to the extractivism of higher education. I don't know about the rest of you. Do you want to comment on that, Sennan? If you do, then you've got to have the microphone.
I think that's sometimes a byproduct of research being very project focused. That we come in for a very short period and then have to leave. One thing we always feed back to funders is, why don't you create funds for us to go to communities to figure out what they need first before we then do the research? What funders hear is, give me money and then figure out what you'll do with it later, which isn't very attractive. Anyone who's done a research funding proposals know you'll have to say what the impact of your project's going to be. But if you are trying to make it community focused or come from the community, you don't yet know what the impact's going to be. So you have to either lie or fudge it a bit, which isn't a good approach for research. Of course, if any funders are watching this, I didn't fudge mine.
I wasn't going to come in, but from what you said, I was involved in a project in China, and I was brought in because I had a background in knowledge exchange. And actually, as output of that is a paper that just came out in the autumn, which has a blueprint for alternative approaches to funding, which includes going in, putting social science or the arts first, understanding what the community wants, needs, what are their biggest pressures is around SDGs and sustainable agriculture and poorest region of the poorest province of China. So actually, if you can understand their biggest pressures, can you then design research around alternative ways of managing that pressure to then improve their livelihoods and improve environmental outcomes at the same time? So it's a wholesale change. And also that what we articulated is because there was some agility in our funding, and we got some additional funding. So the kind of knowledge exchange, which became actually knowledge exchange semi-social science research, grew rather than shrunk during the project because there was demand and interest. And we are now enabled a comparative analysis. We highlighted the benefits of there being flexibility in the funding to allow it to adapt to the conditions ostensibly. So I think we need more of that kind of thing. But also that we have a civic responsibility as because we're still largely funded by the public purse. And so we have a civic responsibility as individuals. And so that's how we're trying to shape our impact narrative. Is there some research impact we have to do for funders or for particular research assessment exercise? But majority of our staff are doing engagement that's for the civic responsibility of an institution. And we have to remember that and encourage that kind of civic engagement and support staff in finding time to do that. That's the challenge, is that we have 4 hats we have to wear, and it's highly pressurized. And I think that that's not often remembered, as well as the wider economics of how universities work that most of us don't have control over. We're just employees within an organization. So what you're talking about is a different tier of conversation, I think.
I'm going to hang on to it.
Thank you. My name's Philippa. I'm a janitor of an empty building that I've got the keys to in Paisley. I'm a visual artist, and I'm also on the community council in Paisley. So this is just in response to Jackie. Because, so I've also, it's ridiculous because I'm an artist and I go to the community council and it's so boring. It's like my eyes glaze over and also the person who does run it shuts me down every time I speak. He shuts me down. And it's really interesting. But I've also become the treasurer and I don't know anything about money. And I've also become the chair of all the community councils for the area. And I had to sit in the big chair in the council chambers and I was like, I don't understand what anyone's talking about at all. But when I was in that meeting, one of the members of the community, one of the communities, so there's about 18 community councils, they said, we really need to have the environment on the top of the agenda for all of us. And the people, I just volunteered, I had no idea what I was getting involved in. I was like, oh my God. And so I wasn't running the meeting very well. And the guy sitting next to me who was in the council were like, oh, well, we'll make this a sub group. And I was like, no, that's not a sub. This needs to be the overarching thing. So in response to you, Jackie, I think we need moles like me who don't really know what they're doing at all. And people think I'm a bit crazy and a bit stupid, but I'm not that stupid. So maybe we just need to get in there and try and understand it. But I think this act, the Future Generations and Wellbeing Act, that sounds really key because they like to follow the rules and stuff like that. So that's one thing. But and I also wanted to talk in response to how artists work. And so I at the moment I'm doing a project completely unfunded. I don't get paid a penny, and I happen to have got hold of the keys to this incredible building, which could be a power station for our street. It happens to be owned by a guy who has a hydroelectric plant in his back garden. So and I'm just doing it on the hoof and making it up as I go along, completely off my own back. And I think that's the key to what artists do. They just go in and make things happen. And also I'm supposed to be doing the poster for the Paisley Community Council, and I've just done a drawing of Paisley on Sea. So maybe if we make that the poster, then maybe it's just. And what also stuns me is because I haven't worked in this world of bureaucracy. It's so boring. I just don't know what they're talking about, and they don't understand me at all. They just think I'm crazy. So, but this is the thing. What I'm stunned by is people's lack of imagination. It's like, why can't you see what? And I'm just like, so that seems to be key as well. Like, we need to activate people's imaginations, and that starts with children. That starts with young ones, So yeah, I'll make my flyer and I'll see how it goes on the community council. But I really need help with this. It's
Sorry, can we do a straw poll? How many people have been or are community councillors in this room? Just out of curiosity, how many? Yeah, it's interesting. It's slightly surprising. More people than you expect. It's quite useful. Sorry, your hand was up there.
Hello. I won't be on long because I'm aware of the time. My name's Robin. I'm an artist, and I just want to draw together a few things. So when I don't live here, I live in a very small Highland village. And we've had a long, protracted set of confrontations, arguments, difficult narratives around 5 wind farms going into deep peat land. And we wouldn't have the time for me to get into this conversation. because I put a 16-point plus letter to the particular electricity company, which we all know the name of, to ask them about carbon neutrality, etc., etc., etc. That's not my reason for saying it. So I want to pick up a little bit, just briefly, on what you were just saying about lack of imagination, because I think we're all innately filled with imagination, and I think we are resourceful, but I think there is a tremendous amount of fear, which creates these castles of scarcity, which makes people hold on to things very tightly. So in that Highland village, we currently, because the wind farms went ahead, and there are 5 of them, there will be 5 in the end, and now we're battling a huge hydro system as well. And I know there are lots of positives, but trust me, when it's on your doorstep and all of that land and 500 lorries day in, day out for 24 hours a day, and when you go to the consultations and they tell you that your electricity is going to go up and it's going to cost you more, and you look at the Beaulieu to Denny line, right, and the top of that is high-speed broadband, but we have no high-speed broadband in the village. I could go on, I won't. But what I will say is, within that community council context, is that they have access at the moment to a 6-figure sum from that particular electricity company. And I, like you, manifest what you're talking about. I've sat in there as an interloper in those meetings for almost 10 years. I'm not just the black sheep in the room. I think they think I'm, apologise for the common parlance here, I think they think I'm mental, right? They can't understand what I'm talking about, and I attempt to continue to be there. And the difficulty is, when we talk about our resilience and pulling our adaptive capacities together, the infrastructures are not there to help people when they are frightened in the face of a 6 mass extinction, overwhelmed by large infrastructures. And then the people in the room, like us, who have a load of toolkits, I'm there going, here, look at all the tools, they're not listening then, because we need a wholesale revolution. And there's nothing much else that I want to add to, but I thought that example brings it all together. So we have to remember, I think there's a lot of fear, so we've got to do a lot of space holding. And that's my final sentence.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Sorry we have more time for more questions, Chris. Can I thank you so much for chairing this excellent session? Can I thank all the panel members? And now we've got Professor Graham Jeffrey to run the plenary for us and wrap up. And I'm going to ask our colleagues from Deer Hunter, Remy and Marag, to come to the stage. Thanks.
Well, there'll be a short 2 or 3 minute intermission. We've got to get the group down from upstairs. So we'll just give it. We'll have to, because they're not here. Yeah, but anyone watching online will just have to have a pause, because we can't begin without having everybody. We can stop. We haven't got Remy now. Oh, please come up. If they're here, come. Please come down. Yes, I'll see that probably.
Yes, please come up, Remy and Marag. And just to remind you all, this is the good bit, you'll find on the door of the entrance to the room here, you'll find a QR code. Please click on that and you'll find your way to an evaluation form. If I say it quickly, you'll not feel the pain. We'd really, really like you to fill those in. And I'm sure Graham will remind everybody else when they come back in the room. Yeah. Thanks.
So I think we will continue just because we are on this clock, and there will be people coming through the door, and we'll just try and deal with people coming through. But I want to introduce our great colleagues from Deer Hunter in the Netherlands, or rather, I'm not just going to let you introduce yourselves, actually. But they've been, as they are doing all the way through this project, mapping, observing, and they will first of all introduce themselves, but then they will introduce a few observations that they've been making just about what's come out from the last couple of days. And then from that, we're just going to open that up for a sort of quick 20-minute discussion, because we also have a great deal of expertise. I'm very aware there's an awful lot of people who could just as easily have been on the platform who are sitting in the audience today, who, we want to give people an opportunity to kind of to feed in. Anyway, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. So as said to almost half of the group, my name is Marlies Vermeulen, that's next to me, Remy Kroese. We are from Deer Hunter, based in the Netherlands, and we are partner in this beautiful project. We will not host artists. We are artists somehow ourselves, but most of all, we would call ourselves cartopologists. And besides Deer Hunter, we also have an institute of cartopology where we teach cartopology to various students, from being a child to being a professional. And we think, we make maps by staying for a very long time, depends, but for quite some time on site. And we try to map really what happens at the place. The most small things, the things that you would take for granted, the things that you would normally not even say. So even if you do plenty of interviews, you would forget saying that because that's so normal to you, but so specific to a particular place. That are the things that we are very much interested in. And we map that. So we make huge, huge drawings of that. And we will do that also in this project on the 4 locations to really fully understand climate change, rivers, raindrops, whatever I've heard today, to see what that does on a location, to really make it small. And to give you just a very simple, the thing is, I have been sitting here the whole day in a black room. I've heard the sun was shining, which is quite extraordinary in Glasgow, apparently. So I found it such a pity to talk about climate in a black room for the whole day, and now we're finishing off doing the same. So I felt a little bit like guilty doing that to the half hour left. So I wanted to do something a bit more interactive, which will also explain a little bit what cartopology is about. And most of you, maybe not all of you, but most of you probably have a pen or something to write and a paper to write on, right? And I would now just like you to write the letter A. Could you please do that? Just write the letter A. You can do it on a phone, but then with a pen. You not just type it, but write it. Just very quickly. It isn't difficult. Just write the letter A. Just write it like you would normally do. And then once you've done that, I would like you now to do the same, but think of drawing that same letter A. Draw that letter. And be careful because Remy is watching. So first write it, then draw it. It can also be the letter B, the letter C, it doesn't matter. But first write, then draw. And I've done this exercise thousands of times to anybody who knows how to write. And it's always the same. The first letter will be one that we will all recognize. That is very typical, that if you have drawn it or you have written it or somebody else, we don't really know the difference very well. But the drawn letter, all of a sudden, I think you became a little bit more ambitious maybe. Or you found it maybe a bit embarrassing to all of a sudden to draw. or you wanted to make it a bit more vulnerable. And most of you probably will have or drawn the letter A with a thickness or with a curve. Perspective, some of you. So all of a sudden, you want to put some of your personality in there. You want to show who you are when you draw, not so much when you write. Then you think in words, so you already translate, but when you draw, you somehow, I don't know, whether you're artistic or not, it doesn't even matter if you can draw or not, but there's another quality in there. And that is exactly what cartopologists try to do. They try to search for the personal quality of a certain place by being there themselves. And if I would put all the first letters of A that you all have been written, they would all look similar. But the second ones that you all have been drawn, they will all look different. So we all have a different perspective to the letter A, actually. Only we have learned in all our professional life to reduce that as much as possible. But climate change or any huge problem like housing problem or whatever kind of problem, we should take that in account with as much perspectives as possible. So why are we excluding the drawing out of our A's then? That is exactly what cartopology is about, and that is also what we will add to the project, and also how we have been looking at today's sessions. And Remy will make that a bit more concrete.
Thank you. No exercises from my side, luckily for you. We wrote down 4 points, yeah, and we will go through them super briefly, just to trigger maybe the discussion afterwards. And I'm really curious about your ideas on it, or your reactions, or maybe oppositions. We're really curious. First one, we've heard a lot of we need transformation and systemic change. Meaning in all fields and disciplines, and obviously there's fields where we've seen, I think half of us are cultural art sector. There were quite some people from, let's say, environmental sectors or disciplines or fields. So there's fields where we have more impact and there's fields where we have less impact. But in general, we've also seen and heard a lot of pointing fingers, like, the problem is capitalism, the problem are the politicians, the problem is this, the problem is that, and we should do this and that. Architects. We're both trained as them. We left the discipline, to be honest, but exactly, also architects. And we were wondering, is it then that everything and everyone should change apart from the cultural and the arts field? Are we already completely on track? Are we the way, pointing the way? I'm not sure. Maybe it's the case, and then please tell me why. But maybe it isn't. And then what should we do? What can we do? Well, we have some ideas about that. Maybe we should stop organizing conferences where privileged participants make use of airplanes to travel to them. I mean, I'm enjoying today, honestly, and it's great organized, and we're doing the 3 days, but we could question it, isn't it? We've heard about the plastic packed and transported water that is being served. Minor detail. I've been counting a little bit. We're in a quite traditional conference setting today. As said, I mean, I'm enjoying it, and there's a lot of knowledge being spread across all the rooms today. The direct hours, somehow, from all the people involved today and the participants, it's about 210,000 euros today. Indirect costs of this conference, emissions and travel. There was diary, there was a lunch with all the products involved that cost, resources, money. A conservative approach and an estimation from my side would be that this day costed between 300 and 350,000 euros, which is between 260 and 300,000 pounds. We could question, was it worth it? I'm not saying it isn't, I'm not saying it is, but I think we are obliged as privileged people to question this. Well, I'm not an economist, I'm also an architect, so I don't have the answer. Maybe we collectively, we do. We should and could open up our practices towards fields we feel less familiar with. I think also art in the service of life, as mentioned by Ben Perry. In that light, also Liz mentioned private ownership as one of maybe the problems, big problems of the development that we're after. Is the problem this private ownership? No, it's a chance. In most cases, the governments aren't at the forefront of developments, at least from our perspective. They follow. They need to represent people. We need individuals, we need neighborhoods, as said by Leah Gillardi, among others, and we need private parties, so we need to speak the language, we need to get them on board. So we can point fingers towards them, but we can't do without them. We're in this capitalist system, sorry. They are also free to demand change from our leaders, our politicians, so please get them on board. That's what we try to do in our practice also. We can't ignore it. Second point, Marlies, spatial and social.
And I'm going to keep it a bit shorter so that we can also talk to people, huh? But often, and I have also heard other things today, but often always we speak about communities and social engagement, and then it's often about vegetables and vegetable gardens and that sort of stuff, or we talk about huge physical, more spatial interventions, and that is strange, because everything takes place, really everything, even your wildest dreams take place in some sort of context. So making maps or writing text or making analysis or whatever you do should incorporate both. That means that they should incorporate the first letter that you have been written and the second one that you have been drawn, where you show more of your personality, where it's more a social approach, one could say, than the first approach, which is more an analytical approach. And that type of document is something that I haven't seen today. We have spoken a lot with the first letter, but there hasn't been, or with a written letter, but there has not been so much about the drawn letter. And that is something that is really, we say, we should have artists for this and for that, but where was their work then today, I wonder? And where is that collaboration between the two letters then? That is really something that we hope we will have examples at the end of this Turning the Tide project. And then quick, the third and the fourth.
Third, Wiener Wasser and Scottish water, brother and sister almost, also in pronouncing it. What we saw, there was a need, drinking water, there was a vision, there was a plan, and there was execution. They did it. I feel we're stuck. I mean, we have a need, climate crisis, and now we're stuck somewhere between the need and the vision. Like, what should we do? What can we do? What can arts do? We all don't know. We're debating, we're talking, we're pointing fingers. Is that the expertise of the arts and culture scene? Talking, debating? No, I don't think so. Not only. Well, no, I don't think it is. That's politicians' expertise, to be bold. Leah Gillardi already mentioned, of course, we're not only raising questions. Start small, start with communities. Maybe that is just the only thing we can do. Ben Perry phrased it like this: walk and ask the questions. Last point, again, starting with Ben Perry, imagining the futures as a very important point. We want to add to that, also imagine today, what is actually happening today. How can we involve these communities, the people that don't feel heard or are excluded right now? And also for that, and maybe especially for that, we need artists. That's also what we try to incorporate in the Turning the Tide project. What actually is happening in these 4 cities, between the people that will be our neighbors for 6 weeks each. That's what we get out of it. And as I said, artists are also really needed for that. And to finish this 4th point, so the imagined futures, I think, and I have an example, they do not resonate within the people and organizations that we need to help us chasing them. The exhibition downstairs, I don't know who of you has taken a look. I think it's a beautiful exhibition. It's brilliant. The work is super well crafted. It's super detailed. The colors, the movements, everything is perfect, I would say. And I dare to say, it's marvelous. Exactly. Good word. Yeah. English is not my mother tongue, but marvelous. We've heard it a lot of times already. So it's marvelous, in my opinion. But honestly, who outside of the arts and culture scene will see this downstairs and we will actually be able to translate this to her or his practice? I don't know. Will any politician or change maker outside of our scene, so to call it, see it and be able to make use of it? Is that the goal of the exhibition? I don't know, probably not. Although it is about future imagination, so I assume it is. But so that's what I mean with this distance between the arts and culture field, and also about speaking the same language and getting people on board, also the private companies.
Yeah. So we hope we provoked and you fully disagree with a lot of things, and that you finally would also maybe stand up and talk back so that we would have a discussion somehow. So thank you for listening.
Okay, so over to you. That's really great. 4 provocations. Thank you very much. Let's hear from various people. I'm going to take the person at the back. Oh, yeah, that's Chris. Yeah, go on.
I just want to say I've seen several people today that I haven't seen for quite a long time, and giving them a hug was definitely worth 350,000 euros.
Okay. Yeah. Next person. Yeah. Go on. Yeah.
You mentioned drawing, and I think a lot of artists, it's kind of, well, speaking as a visual artist myself, I keep my drawings secret. They're like, I don't never show my drawings, and it's almost like so much of social engaged art. It's not about that language. I just did some drawings of you while you were talking there, so there you are talking there. But my mind has gone numb.
Well, not all art has to be public art.
No, but it's like I think again, my brain's gone dead.
Yeah,
Hold on, it'll come back in again.
Yeah, maybe what I can say about drawing is that we all draw, whether you're an artist or not, and whether you're skilled or not. We all draw. When words come short, if that's right in English, then you start drawing, even if it's a teeny tiny sketch somewhere. And so my plea for drawing would not be to show it in some sort of final result and hang it on the wall. No, to the contrary. Drawing is really part of how we think. And especially if we think spatially, because when we draw, we can talk about scale. When we draw, we can talk about proportion. When we draw, we can talk about distance, in a way. And when we draw and show those drawings that you keep secretly, and when we show them, we're not talking about what the end result will be, but we talk about how do we get there. And if you would think that in a more academic research context, that would be transparent in method, but it would also be showing the process that, hey, instead of pointing, nobody actually completely knows. But what if we would all draw together on an interesting map? Maybe we come quite far. And that is where I would say drawing is at its most powerful.
I wonder if there's anyone in the audience who's not from the arts and culture sector or wouldn't identify themselves as an artist or sort of cultural worker, who'd like to offer some reflections on what they've heard today. So we've talked a lot about the arts sector and what it should or shouldn't be doing. Yeah, go on, somebody. Yeah, go on. Yeah. Let's just start at the end there, and then I can't see people's faces very well because the light's very bright. But yeah,
actually, by education, I'm a technical person, but I'm also a political person. I also missed the artistic work here, the creative work actually, and I see myself as a creative person. As I told you, I have a garden, and I love to garden and to do things to help nature survive, to help insects survive, to help birds survive. I never was so interested in bees, wild bees, plants and birds before I had a garden. It's like a a boost in creativity just to see and observe, danke, and observe. Just sit there and observe and consider what kind of bird is it? I haven't seen it yet. This is what, and that's coming here is all. I wanted to see and hear new things. This is why I'm here.
Mm. Good.
I
Thank
hope
you.
that helps.
Yeah, thank you. Another observation that's not from the arts and culture sector. Does someone else want to say something? Yeah. Go.
I'm conservator of architecture, and I'm coming from the technical background, civil engineering. But I think that it's very exciting to find a way to cooperate with artists. However, we are different species, different animals, but to some extent only different. When we found something in common, then the cooperation could be done by 2 heads, 4 hands, and 4 legs. It's very efficient. It was as well subject of my presentation. So
Thank you. Yeah. Okay. Other responses to what you've just heard, either just now or during the day? Yeah. Go on at the back.
I think coming into today, I was relatively skeptical, I hope that's okay to say, in terms of how we can connect marginalised and disadvantaged communities with the climate sphere when they so often feel excluded and not part of it. And I feel like I try and go along to artistics and I don't understand them. I don't really get the exhibition downstairs. I maybe don't always feel they're the spaces that I belong in as a working class Glaswegian, and that's what my research is trying to look at. But actually today, in learning about the building of trust with communities, of how they can show their emotions in ways that they may not feel they can verbalise because they've not been given or they've not been empowered to do so, that visual arts or creative arts can show that instead, has been really eye-opening, and I feel like I've learned a lot that I want to take on in my own practice from today. So yeah, thank you.
Super. Well, that's brilliant. I'm really glad we've been able to assuage some skepticism, because there is, lots of big claims always get made for these sorts of projects, but you are quite well. We're all quite, the ethical issues underneath them. Who's in the room? Who's not in the room? These are all who speaks, who's not, doesn't speak. These are all very important questions. Okay, we've got another 5 minutes, and please, this is your opportunity to feed back anything from what you've heard, anything you want to share. Now's the time, and we're going to stop at 5 o'clock. So please go ahead. Yes, there, and then I'll come to you. Yeah.
I just wanted to say I thought the metaphor comparison of writing and drawing, that was so good, so cool, honestly, because we work I work in governance or politics or whatever. I guess it all mixes together. And if you look at how many limitations we have, either because they have to vote on something in parliament, or because of financial limitations or legal limitations. And I think the cool thing about art is that it should not really have any limitations. And I think that's a freedom that the writing part does not have. And that's why we need the drawing part. So I just wanted to say thank you for saying that, because I thought that was really amazing. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, go on. I've got Julie, then I'll come to Ivona. Yeah, go on.
Hello, thank you very much. I was baffled by drawing an E, utterly baffled, but I gave it a shot. It was bigger, it was pointier, it was triangular. I had quite a nice time once I found a receipt I could write on the back of, so thank you. I'd like to say a little thing about ideas of value and convention, I suppose. The first thing about value is, yes, I take your point. I would like to pose a counterpoint. We are in a space that encourages people, that leads them towards behaving in a particular sort of way. But that is not all of the conference. That is not all of the summit. There are also informal spaces I've met new people, I've bumped into people I've not seen for a while, I've heard ideas that I've not heard, and these will spill into my life. One of the things I do, I teach at a university, and that university is about catching people up to where they should be after perhaps not having the easiest opportunities in education. And what I've heard today will spill into that life. There are things that I will use. And it's not just about the place in space, it's about this place in time and what comes from that. And many things will come from that. As a quick second point, I do work with policy. It is my interest. It is strangely my passion. We are all different. And one of the things you will find with policy, no matter how you interact with it, things you can attach percentages to are still very popular, very accessible. And part of what we're doing here is stretching into spaces where we are arguing for the value of things that don't come in percentages. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you. Ivona wanted to say something.
Okay, I have a comment to this this part of we are yes about that artists are missing here. I think that there were many artists in the audience. I think that how many artists do we have in the audience actually? Quite many, and I think that in contexts like this one, where the program is built on the research, on academic knowledge, its artists are also trying to whitewash the practice with academic explanations. We have quite many PhDs here, as far as I can see. So you found your way here because this is a conference with invitation from the academic world, and maybe not an NGO really, but the University of West Scotland. And we are speaking from the research point of view, academic point of view, and not the practical point of view, which is also interesting, but that's why we miss the show, the presentations of practices which are not well shown to explain the research practice. So this is my conclusion, that for the future, if we want to invite artists to show the practice really and not the research, we must build a program and invite in a different way. Good. And of course, the cultural sector being here, we are managers. So we are filling the gap between people from other contexts, other worlds, other sectors, and ours. And this is also the purpose of that conference, to meet each other, to give that hug to people we haven't seen since years, a year at least, Tara, right? And to fill the gap for the future.
Yeah, maybe I just want to have a small comment, because that's worth a million, eh? Seeing each other on a personal level, but also on a professional level. It's good to have physical contact, and that is definitely worth all the money. And I also understand the comment that you made, and I'm happy that I provoked so that I get something back and that we are in conversation in a way. And also to point out that this is only, as partners, this is only one of the days of all the days that we're here, and tomorrow we go to Dumfries, and yesterday we were in Govan, so we see a lot too. It's just that the sun was shining in Glasgow, and they say that is quite exceptional. So that is the thing, I think. Oh, my bad.
So look, we can get out into the sunshine. I think one of the interesting things is that, and we should acknowledge this, is that these interdisciplinary conversations are difficult. And they're difficult even in a room where, broadly speaking, politically we can say we're not skeptical about climate change. We're anxious, we're fearful, and all the rest of it. Right out there's a raging media storm of disinformation, fake news, all of that, and a far more difficult conversation about climate change. Nobody has mentioned the fact that the Scottish government has collapsed today, or nearly collapsed, because the SNP fired their Green partners out of government. So that will have implications in terms of policy. A lot of the stuff that you've seen in terms of policy has been driven because of this particular political coalition that's been in power in Scotland. So we should acknowledge these are really difficult conversations. And I think hopefully one of the things that you got from Ben was that, I mean, he's right, it takes time. Like, we have to devote time to that. And where do we find the spaces? So I am going to stop because I've been told I have to be bang on time, and I've managed with just about. Thank you all for being so bang on time. And then we can go into the sunshine and carry on the conversation. I just really also want to thank the technical team, Fable Vision Studios, my fantastic colleagues in the Protracted Crisis Research Centre, all our European partners, Fable Vision, Liz, Ivona, and all the people that have come. Massive amount of effort gone into make this happen. So thank you all very much. We will continue outside the door. Thank you. Just great. Just what we needed. Just what we needed. Lively end. I think the issue is like you really want to get across disciplinary collaboration.